This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 3 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland. I'm delighted to be joined today by former first-class cricketer and now Director of Educational Programmes at Epic Risk Management, Patrick Foster. Patrick, thank you for joining us on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And Patrick's contributed already some content for our members over the last couple of years. But Patrick, I know your story. I think it's a really impactful story. And I'm hoping that you're going to share your story today with our listeners. So very much over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's certainly not a story that I ever thought would be the case or happen to me. But I suffered a 13-year-long pathological gambling addiction. When I was younger, I was very fortunate in education and background. Went to one of the top independent boarding schools in the country. I was given every opportunity you can imagine. Things went very well through my time at school and as a young person, very high achieving, both on the sports field, which was my big passion, and kind of in the classroom. And when I was 15 years old, life sort of got even better. My dream came true. I got offered a place on the Northamptonshire Cricket Academy. And like a lot of people do, I spent my final 4 years at school combining my studies with preparing for a life in professional sport. And when I left school, I didn't go off to university, a gap year, or start work like most people. I signed a 2-year professional cricket contract and I started to play cricket for a living. The year after I left school, things went really well for me, a lot better than I ever expected, or I think anybody else did. And at that point, I thought, well, do you know what? This is all going rather well. I'm going to make it. I'm going to play on TV, be rich, famous, and get paid to do what I love. Lucky me. And then at the end of that year, I had a bit more of a difficult decision to make. So I've been offered a place at university on the back of A-levels UCAS application. And cricket was different to a lot of sports in the sense that obviously you play during the summer and during the winter, you have an extended off season. There were centre of excellences now in place, and Durham, where I'd been offered a place, had one of these centre of excellences. So actually, I don't like the term no-brainer, but it seemed it at the time in the sense that I could continue my studies in case I needed something to fall back on, but also continue to sort of train like I needed to. And I arrived at Durham University in October 2006 to start an undergraduate degree. I'm obviously here mainly to talk about my gambling addiction. I haven't mentioned it yet. The reason I haven't mentioned it is because it wasn't part of my life until I was 19 years old. I'd never placed a bet in my life. I wasn't interested in it. It wasn't something that I'd ever been exposed to as a young person. It wasn't something that family did. When you get to university, of course, you meet different people, and that's where I got introduced to gambling. One Saturday morning, some mates went into a bookies and went to put on their normal sort of Saturday football accumulator. I walked into the shop not really knowing what I was doing, and I just watched. And whilst I was in there, I watched a guy play on a machine. He was playing on what's called a fixed odds betting terminal, or a FOB team machine. He was playing a game called roulette. I watched him play on this machine. He punched the machine. He stormed out the shop, and I laughed at him. And I thought, what on earth's wrong with him? Little did I know. I sat down in the machine, and to cut a long story short, I put £2 on green zero. It was the last number to come up. I didn't bother with any of the other numbers. And the first bet I ever placed came in, and £2 became £72. And it's a strange thing to say, but I can't explain that feeling to anybody because I'd never had it before and I'll never have it again. But it gave me this kind of weird rush buzz. The fact that my mates all went mad did nothing for an already sizable ego. We walked out the shop. I lied about what I was doing that afternoon because all I really wanted to do was go back in there. And I spent the next 4.5 hours in there betting on horse racing, greyhounds, football, playing on these machines. And I walked out that night with £250 cash from £2. What I didn't realize was now over the course of the next 13 years, not a day would go past where I wouldn't have a bet either online in a shop or in a casino. During that time, I talk about kind of 3 worlds that I would have, 3 worlds that initially I wanted to keep separate because I wanted to, towards the end because I really needed to. And the first of those worlds was my professional life. From that moment on, as I say, gambling started to play a bigger part in my life. I carried on at Durham. Things were going well, both cricket-wise and in terms of studies. I went back at the end of that year to finish the second year of my contract at Northants, and unfortunately, things didn't go as well as they previously did. But obviously, being a professional sportsman, I had access to more money than most people. I also had a lot of time on my hands when I wasn't playing, and I combated boredom by doing these things more and more, but also I had the disposable income to do it. So I didn't see it as a problem until at the end of that year. Unfortunately, having not had such a good year, I got released. I got sacked, and my dream was over. And that moment in my life hit me really hard. And I always thought I'd be one of those people when faced with moments like that in my life that I would use them to sort of motivate myself or bounce back. But actually, I didn't. I really struggled. I went back to university. I didn't want to let on to anybody that I struggled or I was struggling, because I never struggled with anything, and it didn't come naturally to me to open up about things not going well. But also, I was hurting. I was combating the lack of kind of rush and buzz that I used to get from playing by gambling. And it started to play a bigger part of my life. But I got through my degree. I graduated 2 years later with a 2-1 in combined social sciences. On paper, I had a pretty enviable CV. I never really had a plan B work-wise because all I ever wanted to do is play professional sports. So I moved to London. I got a job in insurance. Followed the crowd. That was a lesson in itself, I think. But got a job with a big insurance company. I got paid a very healthy graduate salary. But my problem, unlike the other guys that were around me, is I couldn't manage or resist the temptations around me, because now every time I got off the tube in the morning, I'd walk past 4 or 5 betting shops that I'd go into at lunchtime after work, casinos that I'd spend all evening in. And now I became motivated by money because it surrounded me, and all I wanted was as much money as I possibly could, and gambling played a big part in that. I actually worked just as hard when I was sat at my desk, and 10 months later, in December 2010, my life would change. One evening when I put a football accumulator on, having been given some good news at work, I put a £500 football accumulator on, which was the biggest bet I'd put on to that point in my life. I was keeping my gambling completely secret at this stage already because I knew I was doing it too much. I didn't want people to question me. And that night, £500 became nearly 35,000. And that moment changed everything, because what a lot of people don't realize is when you win is when you're most vulnerable, especially if you're like me, because I now thought I was invincible. And I thought every time I won, every time I placed a bet, I'd win that amount of money. If I didn't, well, you're going to win it all back at some point. And actually, at the time, it was money I didn't necessarily need. But of course, what happened now was it almost became like a drug, because when I didn't win that amount of money, it didn't give me the same rush, buzz, dopamine hit. And I tried to chase that feeling all the time by putting much more sizable bets and stakes on. I never told a single person that I won £35,000 that night, but I also lost it in 5 weeks. And when it was gone, I wanted it back, and I started trying to win it back. And when I started to lose, I started to feel a huge amount of emotions, sort of feeling very guilty, ashamed, embarrassed, thinking about what I could have done with the money. And I started to combat that by drinking more, sometimes taking drugs, and my life started to go in a very different direction. And 6 months later, in July 2011, I decided to make a change. Not only had I put on 3 and a bit stone by that point, I'd also taken out several bank loans, credit cards. I was now missing my rent on my house. I thought, you know what, I need to do something about it. And I thought if I changed my lifestyle, it would get rid of the problem. I now understand that I needed to change me. But I went home to see my parents. And my biggest regret in my life probably is when I went to speak to them about changing jobs, I didn't tell them the truth. I didn't tell them the truth because I was scared. I didn't know what their reaction would be. I didn't want them to know it was gambling. I thought they'd be disappointed, see me as a kind of failure because I'd made these mistakes. So instead of telling them the truth, I thought I was protecting them by not. I thought I could deal with the problem. I thought, you know what, if I go do something drastically different, it'll get rid of the problem. So I became a teacher. I became a teacher because I thought I've been brought up in schools. If I become a teacher, my parents are going to be proud because they're teachers. They'll love that. But also, if I go and work in that environment, people don't gamble. They don't have the money or time to do it. And that was obviously naive, but that's what I thought. I got a job in Oxford teaching at a very well-known school where I'd spent 5 years before moving to another school. And for a few weeks, I didn't stop, but I did it a lot less. And I thought, you know what, I've cracked this. But then other things started to go wrong in my life. And every time something did, I ran away to weirdly what felt like a safe place, but it was the most dangerous place I could be, because when I was gambling, I didn't think about anything else. And over the course of time, it would start to catch up with me in many different ways, emotionally, psychologically, financially, but also professionally, because I couldn't do my job properly, because it was all I was doing. But also I would eventually make mistakes at work that I'd regret forever, because I started to approach parents of pupils that I taught for money. Once my salary had run out on the first day of the month, having been gambled away, I'd then be stacked up with loans, debts that I needed to pay off, bills that I needed to pay. And eventually every payday loan company, credit card ran out, and I would start to make those decisions by lying to people. And I wasn't stupid. I knew that a lot of the people that I came into contact with had a lot of money. I had access to that information, and I told them lies. They liked and respected me. They were worried about me. I promised to pay them back, but I didn't pay a penny back. And I'd eventually lose my house, my job, and nearly my life. The second world that I talk about is my family, the people around me, my relationships, because throughout this time, I care about these people more than anybody else on the planet, but throughout this time I didn't. Gambling made me so selfish. I only thought about myself. I was a liar, a thief, a manipulator. I did things that I regret so much, like stealing money from my parents, lying to them about why I needed them to transfer me more money, when actually it was only ever to put on a roulette machine or on a horse, but only I knew that. And that's the first thing that most people lose when they battle addiction. Fortunately for me, I didn't, but it's often the hardest thing to get back. And of course, the third world throughout this was the world that took over the other two. Gambling. Over the course of those 13 years, I transacted just shy of £2 million worth of bets online. I had 76 different online accounts opened up in 65 different people's names. I had 23 different bank, payday loan, credit cards. I borrowed money off 113 different individual people. And in March 2018, I was faced with a moment where not only did I have £500,000 worth of gambling debt that I'm paying off for the rest of my life, struggling with anxiety, depression, insomnia at the same time, I faced the reality that I'd been found out, and my biggest secret had been found out by my employers. And I knew at that point in my heart of hearts that I was going to lose my house. I knew I was going to lose my job. And in my mind, I was probably going to go to prison because I'd committed fraud in various different ways and forgery. And I panicked. The irony of a gambling addiction is the only thing you ever think is going to get you out of it as a gambling addict is the thing that's got you into it in the first place. Because I had that big win, I always thought in the back of my mind another one might come along. And actually, if I can get myself out of this hole financially, yes, I might lose my house and my job, but hopefully I can find another one of those. But if I go to prison and have this debt, there's no way out. And I panicked. And to cut a long story short, I borrowed a large sum of money off somebody I'd already borrowed some money off. And during the Cheltenham Festival in 2018, I tried to turn £10,000, which is what I started with, into £500,000. One I lost. And then on the Thursday, I had one extraordinary piece of luck that will probably never happen again. And £10,000 suddenly became £50,000. £50,000 is a life-changing sum of money. I think of it now and I think about how it could change my life. But actually at the time, it was nothing. It was completely worthless because unless it was 10 times that amount, I wasn't in the situation I needed to be. And out of pure desperation. And I always say to people, the only way I can justify it is by saying that at that particular moment in my life, it actually felt like the right thing to do, my only option. I decided to put it all on one horse race, the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. And in my mind, it was literally a case of make or break. If it wins, I win that money back. Yes, I might lose my house and my job, but at least I can pay everybody back and I don't go to prison. If it loses, then there's no other option but to kill myself. That horse came second by a length and my world came crashing down. Actually, I know now that the best thing that ever happened to me in my life was that horse coming second, but at the time it certainly didn't feel like it. And again, without going into too much detail, I attempted suicide in several different ways. The next morning, having had far too much to drink the night before. But fortunately for me, when stood on a train platform at Slough Station, I decided to make the best decision I've ever made, and that was to reach out for help. Because it felt like I needed to tell someone. That was the only reason, really, because I was worried about people wondering where I was. I didn't want to waste their time. It was as simple as that. And I reached out to my younger brother. And I told him what I was about to do. Fortunately for me, I don't think he ever realized how close I was or where I was. And he persuaded me not to do it simply by telling me to open up, by saying to me that I needed to tell him what it was, that I mustn't do what I was about to do because of the impact it would have on so many other people, and that whatever it was, help was possible and they'd support me through it. And that prevented me from doing it. I went home, I came clean to my parents, my girlfriend, which wasn't easy. But it was also amazing because it was the first time in 10 years I actually felt real. I felt genuine because I'd finally told someone I had a problem. I couldn't live with myself, but also I could stop living this lie, this double life. And I told them everything. Their reaction was very different to what I thought it was going to be. They didn't go mad. They didn't disown me. They obviously recognized I needed some serious help. And they were very clear that I needed to play my part in this and gambling had to stop. But I needed help to stop, because if it was just as simple as stopping, then I would have done it long before I did. So I ended up having treatment for my addiction on Harley Street in London. I spent several weeks in a place called Charter on Harley Street, supported by my family, but also by the Professional Cricket Association. And those few weeks, I had to have a long, hard look at myself in the mirror. I had to take full responsibility for everything that I'd done, but I also had to understand what was driving my addiction. And yeah, those few weeks, along with the support of my family and friends, and a fair bit of determination, have allowed me to get my own 2 feet back on the ground and move forward with life. And I've been in recovery ever since. Came out of rehab and I had a burning desire to share my story with people, not because I think I'm some sort of hero who's going to change the world, because I'm not actually proud of anything I ever did, and I never, ever will be, but because I don't want anybody else to go through what I did. And it's happening far too much in the world at the moment, too often. And if I can help one person, as much of a cliche as it is, then it will be worth it. So that's why I do what I do now, why I share my story. And as I said at the beginning, and as I say it at the end, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. I wouldn't want anybody else to go through it. There's certainly some positives that have come from it, and I have to look at those. But awareness, education, and ultimately prevention of people going through what I did is so important, much needed. So yeah, there's an insight into the life of Patrick Foster.
Yeah, well, thanks, Patrick. I mean, an incredible story, and you know, I totally admire your honesty, but also this drive you have now. Obviously, still in recovery, to help other people, to make sure that they don't go through the same thing. It's been a challenging week actually on the podcast this week, because I recorded with Paul Stewart, the footballer, as well, who's very similar in his child protection work now, that even though life's hard every day, he will wake up just to make sure it doesn't happen to one other human being. And it's amazing to see that both you and him, through, I guess, your honesty and your stories having such a positive impact on the world of sport. And it's great that, you know, the world is changing and people do want to talk and people do want to collaborate and people do want to share stories, which, as you say, when you were going through it, society wasn't really like that back then. And I guess now, gambling and gaming today is very different from when you were at university, let's say, and even I was, 20 years ago, because you didn't have the online stuff like you have now. And it was literally the shops. So you had to physically go there, whereas now people have got it on the touch of a device, and I guess are bombarded by it. We only have to watch the sports channels, and there's that pull in for people to see what's going on. So how do you see, obviously you're working in this field every day, how do you see gambling and gaming in the world today, and what do you see, I guess, for sports people? Certainly struck a chord this, sports people who do have a bit of disposable income, probably have a bit more time on their hands after they've finished training and things. How do you see it in society at the moment?
Yeah, I think everything you've just said is exactly right. I think what worries me most about young people is the accessibility that they now have to it. The fact that you can do it anytime, any place at the click of a button. You don't have to go into a shop or a casino like I did when I first started. There's so many different things that you can now bet on. It doesn't just start at the kickoff and finish at the final whistle. There's in-play betting, which is constantly keeping you engaged, so the frequency is there. There's also, as we are finding out all too well, a real convergence between gaming and gambling. Gaming was nowhere near as big when I was younger as it is now. It wasn't something that I ever did, thank goodness. But now, with all these games, some of the things that are built into these games, you talk about things like loot boxes, packs in games like FIFA. The problem is that's normalizing this type of behavior because it's all about trying to turn something into something greater. And in my eyes, are very much unregulated, unlicensed forms of gambling. And a lot of young people, and indeed their parents, don't see it that way. Gambling is heavily regulated. Gaming isn't in any way, and that's a big concern. There's nothing stopping a young person spending an infinite amount of time or money playing these games. So I think that's where it's changed, people engaging with it in different ways from a much younger age. And then actually when you do start gambling in the more traditional sense, it's the fact that just the scope to bet on so many more different things in different ways, anytime, any place, means that there's always going to be more people who get themselves into a mess. In terms of the kind of sport element of it, you're absolutely right about the kind of disposable income that I talked about, often access to money and indeed time. But I think the biggest and most pertinent thing with gambling and sport is the competitive element of it, because I describe gambling now as like a drug for competitive people. And as somebody who is incredibly competitive, what gambling is it's all about winning and losing. And it gives you that on tap. And when you're not playing, it's the closest thing you can get to it, because it's all about, well, will I win? Won't I? As somebody who's very competitive, if you lose, you don't stop there. You keep going until you win, because that's what makes you successful. And then when you win, you think, well, I'll stop. But actually, you're addicted to the feeling of winning in itself, being a sportsman or woman. So I think that is one of the biggest issues for people involved in sport is the kind of competitive element, the buzz replication side of things, as much as the money and the time. And certainly for young people, it might not be gambling, but gaming actually gives them this fix. We work with a lot of young professional sportsmen and women, and we're hearing stories about some of them spending huge amounts of money through gaming, but also that competitive element of the crossover where they're gambling when they play a game against each other, and that kind of constant interaction or engagement with it.
Yeah, I think there's a few things with it, isn't there? I think the one about the time, but also, as you say, chasing that feeling when you can't do it. And I was listening to your story earlier and thinking about how often so many young people's identity is linked to that sport. So the thing that they grow, everybody knows them, whether that be for their cricket, their rugby, or their football. They're doing quite well with it. They've played good age group stuff. They go out into the men's world, which is a very different beast, as you all know, and a very different beast moving from schoolboy into that element. And I think that when things don't go quite as well, I think there's a major appeal for people to go and I think escape reality. Because I think I see this even when I get concerned at home, when your own children are maybe involved in a game, and we're not talking to the level that we're talking about here, but involved in a game where almost nothing else matters. It's about the game. And you ask them to do something and their mind's just totally fixed on the game. And then they do a job half well to get back to the game. And it goes back to that, what you were saying earlier, that it just takes over everything because nothing's as important or as exciting. And I think that's a real concern for me with the gaming element in particular now, that, as you say, there are so many similarities between the gaming world and the gambling world.
Exactly that. And I think the fact that a lot of these games are designed to be that way. So I can empathize with young people because actually they're designed to keep them playing. They're designed to keep them involved. And so actually it's really hard to kind of stop yourself. And so I see that all the time. And I think what's really interesting is in the 3.5 years that I've been in recovery, we've seen a big change in gambling and gaming in so many different ways, but actually it's just the prominence of it as a discussion point now. And I think part of that is because of advertisements and the exposure to it, but also it's kind of now people realizing the gaming element and how much time people are spending doing it. And it's funny, I talk about all the financial side of what came with gambling, and don't get me wrong, I'd have it all back if I could, and the consequences of it rumble on for years and years, and I have to accept that. I have to make sacrifices, but actually the bit that I regret most is the time and the opportunities, because the amount of time I spent doing these things, glued to my phone, glued to my laptop, watching something on my computer, watching a screen in a betting shop, is just wasted time that I can never ever get back. And of course the knock-on effect was then opportunities go out the window. And I think back, and it's so easy as somebody who almost made it as a sportsman and didn't really, it's so easy to say, well, what if I'd spent more time in the nets or in the gym? And I think you can always do that, but I think you can do too much of it. But I now think back and I think, well, what if I just spent some of that time doing those things rather than what I was doing? That and the kind of way it changed me fundamentally as a person. That's what the addiction does to you. I became everything that I hated, but actually the money is probably the bit that doesn't hurt the most. Of course, it hurts because I owe people money and I'm in the process of paying people back, and I will make sure I do that. But I can get the money back, and it's money. I can never get the time and the opportunities back. And that's the bit that really hurts, actually.
Yeah, and I think that will be a bit that will resonate with parents as well. When they hear this, because actually this is still an awareness thing, because sometimes, we let children game because it's easy for us, it keeps them occupied, we can get on with what we've got to do. And until somebody really points out the volume of time that they're potentially on there, or what the alternative could have been, or the time could have been spent on, I think it's a real worry for parents. And I think actually even in private education over the last 20 years, I left that last summer. Soon as there was an opportunity to game, young boys would be desperate to do it. Soon as it became a choice. And actually the bigger battle was making sure that that choice was limited to such a small fraction of time, so it didn't have that level of impact. But you can so see the appeal for young people in doing it. And yet it's a bit easier to use our experience as adults to explain that you could be spending that time doing something useful, because it may lead to this, and this, because they don't see that. They don't think like that. They don't think at the age of 11, oh, well, actually, those 2 hours there, as you say, doing a bit of extra football or a bit of extra cricket batting is a far more effective use of time than gaming. How do you think parents should approach that whole thing? What do you think parents should be looking for? Because gaming's there, it's going to exist, isn't it? But how do we sort of manage it, or what signs are we looking out for, really, with our own children?
Yeah, it's a really important point. It's actually quite a difficult question to answer. I think balance is obviously the most important part. I don't believe now in this day and age that sort of not letting kids game is the solution. Similarly, when it comes to gambling, it's so ingrained in culture and society. It's what young people do. So actually, if you suddenly say, no, don't do it at all, that can create even more problems in itself. It's about balance. I mean, talk about moderation. Too much of anything is not good for anybody. When it comes to gaming, I think putting pretty firm boundaries in place, where actually there are limits, both financially but also in terms of time, and it's finding the right balance that's important. I think protecting sleep is huge. I was an insomniac for 10 years. I didn't sleep properly through the night because I was either up in the middle of the night doing these things, looking for money while someone was asleep, or couldn't sleep because I was so stressed and my mind was racing. And actually, I now know how important sleep is. And when young people spend their whole time at night doing these things, whether it's engaging with social media on a screen or gaming, protecting sleep is really important. And helping them understand that's, I think, a big part of it. But yeah, it's about putting boundaries in place, both financially and time. I had a really interesting conversation with somebody the other day, a parent who didn't appreciate that now with some of these things, you can accrue sort of points which allow you to then buy things within these games. And there's two ways to do it. You either spend the money, and that accelerates that, it gives you those points, or you spend a certain amount of time doing it. And because these parents were very strict, understandably and rightly so, on the financial side of things, their child was spending huge amounts of time doing it, so that basically he would sort of catch up in that way. So it's understanding the kind of complexities of some of these things. And yeah, I mean, there's obvious things, there's obvious bits of advice, like don't link up your credit cards. But of course, these companies are so clever, because often you have to have a credit card linked in order for an account to be in place. but it's making sure that you stay on top of things, make sure that you're constantly checking, and it's about setting those right boundaries and the right balance. In terms of kind of signs to look out for, I think a lot of them spend too much time doing it. It's the obsessing, it's the not being happy doing anything else. That is a big thing, because it's almost like, well, unless I'm doing that, there'll be young people that love gaming, but also they'll still love doing the other bits, and when they're not gaming they still get such. But it's that kind of obsessing where if they're not doing it, they're not happy, or it's constantly, how am I gonna play on the game again, or how am I, a bit like me with kind of gambling.
It becomes the first sort of port of call, doesn't it? So you wake up and it's like, well, what am I doing this morning? Oh, well, I've got to game. Or hang on, I've got an hour between finishing this before I go out. What am I going to do with my hour's time? Oh, well, I'll game. It becomes like the only choice, doesn't it? That's how young people see it. So they pick any moment. And as you say, what happened to reading? What happened to listening to music? What happened to playing in the garden? What happened to all the bits that we know are much healthier, but seem to have been overtaken?
I think they've all got a part to play, because gaming is now how young people socialize. It's weird to think of it that way, but it is. So it's important that they're allowed to do it, but not all the time. And it's that mental obsession. I say to people, gambling, I obviously had to do it. I had to place the bets. I was doing it, but actually it was the mental obsession as well, because I'd wake up in the morning and my first thought would be, right, what bets am I going to put on today? I'd think about it. Then whilst I was waiting for the outcome of a bet, it would be, right, what am I going to bet on if this comes in, or what am I going to do if this doesn't? That was literally all I thought about, and everything else came second. Not just sort of physically, but also mentally. So I think that's the biggest thing. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, these things are called invisible or hidden addictions for a reason, because I became pretty good at hiding it for 12 and a half years. And there are definitely things that you can, I mean, when it comes to gambling, I think the kind of giveaways from a financial point of view are the most obvious signs. Never assume that they don't need money if they're constantly asking for money to fund something like this. Find out where that money is actually going. And the solution is never ever, if they get in that position where they're in trouble, just to bail them out financially, because it will only enable them to do it. So find a way to kind of do that productively. These things, of course, everybody spends on mobile phones. Everybody spends way too much time on them, adults, young people. But when you are addicted to particularly gambling, you are really addicted to your mobile phone. I mean, I could not get off my mobile phone. I would find any opportunity to do it. If socially it wasn't the right thing to do, if I was under the table trying to do it subtly and somebody pulled me out on it, my solution was very simple. I'd get up and I'd go to the loo, because nobody could stop me doing it in the toilet. I'd spend hours in the toilet. And that was one of the things now that my family look back on. I've just written a book. I've got a book coming out in February. And that's one of the things that I kind of talk about in there, is retrospectively now, all the things that people say, oh my word, that makes so much sense now, or yeah, I can understand it. Oh, you did this, or you were, and it's interesting. So hopefully that will help in terms of people recognizing sort of signs in other people.
Yeah, and again, it's just this awareness thing, because some of the things we're talking about today, if you've never been around it or seen it, you wouldn't recognize it. It's a whole self-awareness piece, isn't it? Is there anything you're seeing in your work around esports? Because esports will certainly split the world, I guess, the people that I know in sport can't stand the thought that it's classed as a sport. People can then say, well, actually, I can spend time gaming because I can make a career out of this and make money out of it, which then fights against the other argument of getting off devices and spending huge amounts of time on it. Is there anything you're seeing from your work around esports, or any interesting dialogues you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, esports is huge. It's going to be enormous. It already is in certain parts of the world, certain places, but it's growing at an extraordinary rate. We're actually working in professional esports, just like we do in professional sport. We're replicating that work. I think what's kind of a concern of mine when it comes to anecdotally, when I talk to young people, I think it's kind of twofold. The first is the amount of them that want to become professional gamers. There are huge amounts of people that want to become professional sportsmen or women who chase that dream, and sadly, not everybody can do that, as I found out. But I think in terms of esports, those numbers are even greater. So we're going to see a huge number of young people who are chasing that dream, which I'd never try and get in the way of, although it's not something I can relate to. But at the same time, it's the realization of how competitive that is, how many people are doing it, but also the negative consequences that come with it, because we know that sport-wise, in its traditional sense, if you try and become a professional sportsman or woman, there's going to be a lot of positives that come with it in terms of social interaction, in terms of the physical benefits. But when it comes to esports, if you don't make it, actually the impact is much more negative. There aren't many positives. That's one element. The second element is the kind of going back to gambling, is this really is the link between the two. Because of course now you can not only gamble on traditional sports, you can gamble on esports. It's going to make it even more of a kind of 24/7 industry. The accessibility, it's going to appeal to so many more young people. I was in a school the other day and a year 10 boy asked me about gambling on esports and whether that's okay. And my explanation was, well, it's exactly the same as betting on football. But we talk about the convergence between the two. It's going to exacerbate that to astronomical levels, I think. So yeah, it's a fascinating world, one that I'm learning a lot about quickly. And as you just said, for a lot of people don't, well, it's not a sport, but actually it is, and it's going to be viewed that way. And I think we'll see a lot of the problems that we've seen in traditional sports mirrored in esports, but only to a greater level.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't think you could have explained that any better in terms of how you look at it logically, because at least with traditional sport, the chances are slim, but you're still picking up, hopefully, some life skills and some other strands to your character that will allow you to then go and do something else, potentially thrive in other environments. And going back to this whole identity thing again, hopefully, that if parents, which is a lot of the work we do, are trying to encourage multifaceted children in amongst the one thing that they're particularly excelling in, that it gives them a really good chance. Whereas in esports, we could be sat with no identity, no nothing, and then a lot of the skills that you need to succeed in today's world are then missing, and you're left picking up the pieces. So I think it's going to be a case of watch this space, isn't it, Patrick, on that one?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. What do you think parents should do if they become really concerned or they know? I hear a lot in traditional sport where parents have said to me, Gordon, I just had a gut feeling something was wrong. Not necessarily around gambling. They just knew that something wasn't right. And many of them regret not acting when their gut was telling them something was wrong. If parents have got any concerns around this gambling and gaming, or worried about any signs, what advice would you give them?
I think what you've just said is as an important bit of advice as anything else, and that is to act on it. If you do have those concerns, assume the situation could be the worst, and therefore do something about it. Try and have that conversation, initiate that conversation. It's not always easy, but I think if you can have that, that's huge. And often the initial reaction won't be what you want, but at least that young person then knows that that you are concerned, and that it may come back to you. I think taking away judgment is huge. That's why most people don't reach out for support, is because they're worried what people will think or say. So the more you can do to reassure them that the consequences aren't going to be as bad as what they think, and that actually you're not going to react in the way that they're probably thinking, providing that support is massive. Often I always say to people, don't try and be the hero and deal with the situation there and then, because as parents sometimes that's really difficult. And I'm not a parent yet, hopefully one day I will be, but there's this kind of, well, I've got to wave a magic wand and get rid of this problem, but actually you might not be able to. So don't be afraid to lean on external support. It is huge, because often you're the last person that they want to be dealing with this problem. And I think the final thing, and I think this is one of the motivations for me doing what I do now, is around this kind of belief that there is a type. There are certainly more people that are more vulnerable, things that make people more vulnerable, but actually what we're seeing, particularly in sport, that is really interesting, I think, is when it comes to problems with addiction, whatever that addiction is, and indeed mental health, it's so often the person that everybody else least expects it to. So often it seems to be the person that is so high achieving, that everybody looks up to, that everything in their world seems perfect. And I think a mistake a lot of people make is they think, well, it won't be them. I mean, I thought it won't be me, but I think other people thought, well, it won't be him. He'll be fine. When actually we're seeing that it's so often that person. I think because of the pressure that comes with keeping that up and maintaining that kind of facade, because that in itself is exhausting. And they're often the people that fear failure the most, or when things go wrong, struggle to deal with it the most. So I think never assume that it won't be this person or that person because everything seems fine. Is a big one for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Patrick, I'm just conscious of the time and the amazing stuff we've covered in what seems longer than the hour we've been sat here. I mean, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours on this. I mean, you're obviously doing some amazing work, and it's great to see on social media the number of sports organizations you're working with, the schools you're working with. I saw that you're doing some work in the US as well. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So what are your sort of, I guess, hopes and aspirations for the future in this space?
I think the biggest thing for me is that actually I don't think anybody is ever not going to be harmed by gambling or have a problem of this kind. It's like, I always use the analogy, it's like me being an alcoholic and then stopping drinking and trying to shut down every pub. I'm not stupid. I recognize a lot of people do it, don't have a problem with it. It's a form of entertainment. They're gambling with time and money that they can afford to lose. I just hope that things change in that gambling doesn't carry the same stigma that it always has. Mental health is no longer a taboo subject, or a lot less than it was. I think gambling still is. It's still a dirty word, and I hope that changes. I also hope that a lot more is done to protect young people, both through regulation and education. I think the exposure that young people have, the fact that gaming is not regulated, I really hope that changes. And I think more than anything, I think the biggest thing is that people who are in that situation do something about it, because there are too many people that are suffering in silence when it comes to problems with gambling particularly, but also I think gaming, and goodness knows what's going to happen with regards to the after effects of COVID in this world, which concerns me massively. But I think we're going to see a huge rise in the number of people that are struggling with that. I think we need to make sure that help is available, but people also have what it takes to get the help that they need, because there are too many people that are suffering and doing so in silence, and you don't want anyone to be going through that.
Patrick, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been an amazing podcast recording. I wish you all the very best for the work that you're doing, and I hope that we'll find some way of incorporating your work into the work we're doing here at Working with Parents in Sport. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me, and keep up the great work that you're doing.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.